Welcome to Weekend Ag Matters from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. Join us for an in-depth look at Iowa agriculture. Here's your host, Riley Smith.
It's been a very busy week in the ag industry. Welcome into this week's edition of Weekend Ag Matters. I'm Riley Smith. Russ Parker, Dustin Hoffmann, and Mark Magnuson will join us later on in the show. As for right now, let's start with a quick look at the news headlines. During yesterday's White House Great American Agriculture celebration, President Trump announced that the Environmental Protection Agency has finalized the historic renewable fuel standard Set 2 final rule. The final rule realigns the program with Congress's original intent, increasing the use of homegrown American biofuels, putting American farmers first, and promoting American energy independence. The rule requires 15 billion gallons of conventional renewable fuels like corn ethanol in both 2026 and 2027. In addition, 10.82 advanced biofuels RINs are required in 2026, increasing to 10.98 billion RINs in 2027. EPA will also reallocate 70% of the renewable fuel volumes lost to small refinery exemptions for 2023 through 2025. It has been noted that by not fully reallocating the renewable fuel volumes lost to SREs issued for 2023 through 2025, the rule stops just short of providing farmers and ethanol producers the market expansion opportunity Congress envisioned in establishing the RFS program. In other news, the Trump administration this week issued an emergency waiver authorizing nationwide sales of E15 during the summer of 2026. Iowa Secretary of Agriculture Mike Naig said, "I appreciate the Trump administration allowing the nationwide sale of E15 this summer. This is a win for farmers, drivers, and homegrown American energy. I also want to thank Iowa's congressional delegation for continuing to push for year-round E15. But to be clear, our farmers and consumers shouldn't have to rely on short-term emergency waivers every year. Congress has had multiple chances to provide farmers, biofuel producers, and fuel retailers with the long-term certainty they need by fixing this issue permanently, and they have failed to get it done. It's long overdue for Congress to finally pass a permanent nationwide fix for year-round E15, which will save Americans money at the pump, support a critical market for farmers, and boost American energy independence." End quote. And finally, a bipartisan group of U.S. senators has introduced legislation aimed at increasing transparency in fertilizer markets and potentially lowering costs for farmers facing high input expenses. Senators Tammy Baldwin, Chuck Grassley, and Joni Ernst said the proposal would require the U.S. Department of Agriculture to study competition, pricing trends, and supply factors in the fertilizer industry. The agency would be directed to publish a public report within 1 year examining issues such as market concentration, import reliance, and trade policies. That's all the time we have for news headlines this week. You can find all of our daily ag news content online at iowaagnet.com. We'll go ahead and kick it over to Russ Parker with his faith-based food for thought here on Weekend Ag Matters.
We were taking care of grandchildren this past weekend, and after glancing at my watch, I said, "It's time to get ready to go." It was Sunday morning, and I had just awakened the kids, maybe a little earlier than they were used to getting up. And there were things to do. Bathroom, church clothes put on, suitcases packed. It was time to get ready to go to their house. Getting ready has different levels, doesn't it? For example, getting ready to start the day is a whole lot different than getting ready to go on vacation. And getting ready to pay for a cup of coffee is a whole lot different than getting ready to pay for a new vehicle. The point is, sometimes what we think is getting ready really isn't. I remember getting ready for a wedding day, sending out invitations and lining up the venue and meeting with the priest and making sure that everything was in place. But looking back, that was only the first step, because what we were really getting ready for was a lifetime of marriage. And that's a process. Maybe in some way getting ready is really never finished. And right now we find ourselves in the season of Lent and the beginning of Holy Week. This is a time when Jesus himself was getting ready, and not in a casual sense, but in the most intentional, purposeful way imaginable. From his entry into Jerusalem to the upper room to the garden and ultimately to the cross, every step was part of preparation, and not for his benefit, but for ours. In the 22nd chapter of Luke, Jesus prays, "Father, if you are willing to take this cup from me, Yet not my will, but yours be done. This is the essence of what readiness looks like. It's not about checking off a list, but rather it's about surrender. It's about alignment of our will with God's will. So during this Holy Week, maybe the question isn't just, am I getting ready? But rather, am I getting ready in a way that reflects Jesus? Because real readiness isn't a one-time event. It's a daily decision. It's how we live. It's how we love. It's how we trust. So let this season of Lent be our reminder that getting ready for Easter isn't just about arriving at the celebration. It's about walking the road that gets us there. So as we move through Holy Week, may we not just be getting ready, but truly ready, with hearts humbled, lives surrendered, and faith strengthened. Easter's coming. Food for thought, I hope. This is Russ Parker. Have a blessed day.
Thanks, Russ. That's it for segment 1 on this week's episode. Coming up after this short break, Dustin visits with Iowa Ag Secretary Mike Naig. This is Weekend Ag Matters. In rural Iowa, we know you're sold on your local radio station. The Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network partners with local Iowa stations to deliver the latest in agriculture news, including grain elevator prices, market reports, and ag policy news. Trusted local voices, trusted ag content. This message is brought to you by your friends at the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, where Iowa Ag matters.
Welcome back to Weekend Ag Matters. Here's your host, Dustin Hoffmann.
We're here on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, and it is time for our monthly sit-down with Iowa Agriculture Secretary Mike Naig. Secretary, thanks so much for taking the time to visit. It's Iowa Ag Week, and of course, we got to make sure we're sending out a lot of thanks to the people that produce all kinds of agriculture products in the state and do everything they can to help fuel us, feed us, and keep us clothed.
Absolutely. And again, we have a diverse agriculture here. Yes, we're known for those corn, soybean, pork, beef, dairy, eggs, but we also have a really growing and thriving and exciting specialty crop and direct-to-consumer sector. You and I have talked a lot about what's happening around Choose Iowa and all the great things, chooseiowa.com, where you can find the kind of diversity of everything from fruit and veg and flowers and beekeeping, milling, brewing, distilling, all those types of winemaking, all those types of things. But also, I think the calling card, if you will, the hallmark of Iowa agriculture has been around value-added agriculture. So taking those commodity crops that we grow so well in this state and turning that into high-quality protein or ethanol or biodiesel or bio-based chemicals and materials. That's really what makes us, I think, special, is that we take that commodity and we turn it into something of higher value. And that's certainly where we have to continue to look at going forward, is expanding that value add opportunity, expanding the diversity, and really connecting better with what people need here in Iowa, around the United States, and really around the globe.
And of course, with it being the 250th birthday of the country, you know, it's even more important to highlight the impact that agriculture's had on growing this civilization here. Absolutely. And we're really trying to put that theme together with ag, and certainly with Ag Week and our Ag Leaders Dinner that's coming up next week. We'll have an America 250 theme to it, but you're going to see this carry all the way out through county fairs and state fairs, the state fair, not state fairs plural, but and a harvest festival this fall. You're going to see us try to bring this America 250 concept together with food and agriculture. Look, you go back to the beginning of this country, things that set us apart. Of course, farmers, our founders, many of our founders were farmers. Many of the people that first picked up arms to go and fight for our freedom and to defend our liberty were farmers and rural people. And then you switch and you say, then the American farmer switched to sustaining this country. We couldn't be who we are as a country. You couldn't have American exceptionalism, American greatness, the ability to pursue the American dream if you don't have a stable food and agriculture, a stable energy supply. Those things set us apart. And even we're seeing in the world today, there are places that do not have that kind of stability, don't have that kind of self-sufficiency that we do. It really does set us apart. I just think it's important to remember that, both in the America 250 context, but also just in our daily lives, and certainly as we're talking about Ag Day and Ag Week. All right, and then moving on to things like E15. Boy, this last couple of weeks, we have definitely seen the fuel prices skyrocket. Even E85 has gone up. But this situation with Iran and how everything's playing out with the oil markets, well, that really can help drive home that need for E15, and it would kind of hopeful that Congress is paying attention.
Yeah, not to make light of a very serious situation from a national security standpoint in any way, shape, or form, but it is a reminder, and even it goes back to some of what was the origin. One of the original motivators for the renewable fuel standard to begin with was around trying to promote and improve and enhance and increase American energy production. And to me, that's all of the above. Yes, that's more oil and natural gas, but we can do this from a renewable fuels standpoint as well. And again, a supply chain disruption that affects oil prices, that then affects the price that Iowans pay at the pump, is exactly the reason that we should push for E15 year-round nationwide. We know the numbers. You save 10 to 15 cents a gallon when you're pumping E15 over E10. Why not apply those savings? That's important anytime, but it's certainly important right now as well. So continues to be, I guess we'll continue to call it a high level of frustration, or certainly we are motivated to try to see something happen at the congressional level, find the right vehicle to get some language moving to get that nationwide access. But also in the meantime, having to look at plan B, C, D, whatever it takes. And there's some other important biofuel news, the setting of the renewable volume obligation, the RVO numbers that need to come out of EPA. That is certainly one thing. And then, of course, we could end up with another emergency waiver that allows for year-round access to E15. That is a good thing in the sense that it does allow more access to E15, but it is not the solution. We must have that congressional action, change the federal law, and make this a permanent fix.
And that's what I was going to talk about next. President Trump's supposed to be having some big announcements this Friday at the White House as he celebrates agriculture there. There is hope that the RVOs are announced, but the E15 waiver now, of course, Iowa doesn't have to worry about that. We're that group of 8 Midwestern states that don't have to deal with that because we've already found a workaround to get that to happen. But it's interesting to see how much Iowa is still playing a part in that, obviously as the top biofuels producer in the country, but still wanting to make sure that access is available to everyone, even though we've already got it.
Yeah, cards up. We need to say that we would like to see access in places where there's a lot more, a higher number of gallons that are pumped into tanks, right? I mean, that's just the fact. Here we sit, 3.1 million Iowans, and we know, again, we're saving tens of millions of dollars a year in savings by pumping E15. Imagine what that could be nationwide. But really, this is about just providing that certainty all across the country, even in some larger states on the coasts, that could be using a lot more of this fuel. And as the number one producer, of course, that benefits us. Look, I've been through this so many times, but it's still true, and it just needs to be said. When you're using more ethanol, that is a signal to grow to the ethanol industry. When they grow, they need more corn. That sends a signal to the corn price, and also consumers are getting that benefit, and it's a cleaner burning fuel. You stack all those wins together, this is a no-brainer, but obviously we've got some work to do yet, and we'll be waiting to see. The president has been very supportive of E15. The administration is truly, I think, doing what they can, but obviously this needs to get through Congress.
And then last time we talked, I should say, we were talking ahead of you possibly going to Mexico on a trade trip, and now plans changed in the light of how things were kind of panning out between when we talked last. You want to tell us what the update is, as it's been postponed a little while?
Yeah, unfortunately, we had to postpone that trade mission, that trip to Mexico that we were intending to take. And that came, if you'll recall, at a time where there was activity around cartels in the western part of Mexico, Guadalajara, that area. And several Americans had been stuck, unable to get back because of disruption in flights and those types of things. So just truly out of an abundance of caution for the group that was traveling with us, we decided to postpone that trip. Canada and Mexico, our number one and number two trading partners, critically important. We're very disappointed that we were not able to make the trip at this time because, of course, the thinking about heading into this year with the review of the USMCA, significant market for pork and corn and DDGs in particular, but really across the board. So Mexico remains an absolute priority for us. Unfortunately, weren't able to take the trip, but it's on we're in the process of rescheduling, and we'll be getting back there as soon as we possibly can.
And you brought up USMCA, obviously up for renegotiation this year. I mean, as we look back on the last 5 or so years of it, is there anything that sticks out that we might need to change for agriculture, or also maybe reiterate is working for agriculture as these negotiations happen?
Yeah, I think from my chair, from our perspective here in Iowa, I think this works very, very well. But we have to recognize this, which is, hey, we're one part of this USMCA agreement. And so you do hear things about automotive challenges, maybe some on the fresh fruits and vegetables side of things, dairy with Canada. There are irritants. But let me be clear about this. Every trade agreement, every trade relationship has irritants. But the point is that even as we dealt with things like Mexico trying to prohibit the importation of GMO corn, right? There's not enough non-GMO corn in the world to supply the Mexican market. The Mexican consumer can't afford to pay for it if they did try to create that market. And so we needed to bring resolution to that. And your ability to do that through the framework of a trade agreement is critically important. So very, very, very important that we have an agreement with U.S., Canada, and Mexico together. And there are irritants. They need to be worked through. But I would say largely for us, when it comes to pork and corn and DDGs and soybean meal, beef, turkey, these are very important markets for us, and we need to continue to push forward with that.
That again was Iowa Agriculture Secretary Mike Naig here on Weekend Ag Matters. We're going to take a short break, and Mark Magnuson will be in to wrap up the show coming up next.
Hi, my name is Ethan Smith, and I've been a certified crop advisor in Iowa for about 6 years. The Iowa CCA program is valuable to me because it helps keep me informed on new topics and research around the industry, including soils, insects, diseases, and much more. It's also a great way to network with others around the state and beyond. Iowa is known for its crops, and that's why we're here. To learn more about becoming a certified crop advisor, visit iowacca.org.
Welcome back to Weekend Ag Matters. Here is Mark Magnuson.
Mark Magnuson for the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, and I'm joined today by Cody Bills of Farmers Business Network. As we are looking ahead to next week on the 31st, we will receive the prospective plantings report from the USDA, which of course is a survey-based report that lets us get our first real snapshot of the year of what we could expect for acreage in corn and soybeans and the rest of the major crops going into this year's growing season. And Cody, thanks for joining us here today. Wanted to ask you about the FBN report that came out ahead of the USDA's report and a chance to look at some of those projections from USDA. Could you tell us about the methodology of the report and what you learned in this year's FBN planning report?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have thousands of farmers in our network, and every year we send out a text message asking farmers to reply and say, hey, tell us what's changed this year between what you planted last year and what you planted this year. And we get over 1,000+ responses. Some years we've had almost 2,000 responses. This year was over 1,000 responses. It gives us just an indication. And what we're trying to do is really replicate the way that the USDA asks the question, so we can try and get some sort of insight into what the USDA might say next Tuesday. What we ended up doing, well, let me just frame this. Our survey results have really performed nicely when compared to the average analyst guests out there and just the analysts that publish their reports. On average, we're about 40% more accurate for corn acres when comparing our acreage survey and the actual prospective plantings report, and about 7% more accurate for soybeans than kind of the average guess in the field of analysts out there. So we think it's a pretty good survey. And what it showed us this year is corn at 96.9 million acres, soybeans at 84.6 million acres. So those numbers, let's just let those sink in. Though we are smaller, about 1.9 million acres lower than where we were last year for corn, it's still about 2.5 million acres over the average trade guess. a lot of market participants right now are looking to see around 94.37 million acres go to corn, and we're saying 96.9. And for soybeans, we're also on the lower side of expectations. We're expecting 84.6 million acres. That's about 0.9 million acres below the average trade guess. So what we're seeing is just a little bit less aggressive shift out of corn and into soybeans, but still we are seeing a reduction in corn acres from last year and a 3.4 million acre increase in soybean acres.
So, Cody, that is very interesting because we've heard so much speculation going into the USDA's report on Tuesday about how many acres would potentially shift from corn to soybeans because of those input prices. And I'm thinking specifically about fertilizer. So could you tell me, does fertilizer factor into your survey at FBN and your planning report?
You know, it doesn't. It would only factor in the way that the farmer would respond to our survey. And I think this is really important. A lot of people are talking about fertilizer could shift acres, but it's a survey-based response. That's what the USDA is giving us, and that's what we did. And I think one thing that we need to remember is that the Iran and U.S. conflict had really only started kicking off at the end of February and the beginning of March. And that's when we were actually doing the survey. And so we actually hadn't seen the cash prices and the increase in fertilizer costs yet. That was just what was projected to happen because of logistics constraints coming through the Strait of Hormuz. So really, I think there's a chance here that you actually that you see the USDA not really able to factor in the increase in fertilizer costs and what that may mean to acreage. I think where you may see that factor in is in the June report after it becomes more apparent in the cash market and farmers ultimately need to make final decisions before they start getting planters rolling.
And you started off by talking about the accuracy of the report from FBN and especially looking back at past years. Do you think then that comes down to the methodology from FBN of actually sending those survey questions like the USDA would for a report like this, whereas maybe compared to some industry projections, they're just strictly crunching those numbers and trying to almost predict what's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, some analysts may look at statistical correlations, and people may look at the the soybean to corn price ratio, and you may look at that and say, all right, like how would acres shift around? And we're not doing that, and it's not that we don't think that has value. It does have value. It's just what we're trying to do. I mean, we're Farmers Business Network. We got a network of farmers, and we're trying to get people to participate. And when you take the survey, you get the results. You're the first in line to get the survey response, the results that we publish. And so we're just trying to bring value back to the farmers, give just a little bit of insight from the entire network that we have. So yes, I think that's what differentiates us. One thing that was interesting is I think it was Farm Futures came out with their survey just this morning. They published it, and theirs is a survey-based response as well. And they were also around the 96 million acre mark. I think it was 96.4. So it was interesting. That was also survey-based and also kind of showed higher corn acres. So I mean, we're not the only ones up here, but it is pretty lonely up in the 96.9 million acre threshold when it comes to survey. Or when it comes to expectations for this report.
Now, obviously, Cody, here in the state of Iowa, we're going to focus on corn and soybeans for the most part. But were there any other crops in your planning report that some of the numbers caught your eye or something that you thought was significant?
Yeah, we saw a little bit of an increase in sorghum acres. I think it was about sorghum was a 0.9 million acres, and we got a strong response, a survey response out of Texas. I think that was kind of interesting. I think there's a good chance that could win out some cotton acres. Sorghum has just a better drought tolerance. It's been very dry down there. It also, when you look at new crop corn prices moving higher, it just becomes economically a little bit more appealing. Another thing that we noticed is spring wheat out of North Dakota and Minnesota. We think there's some acres there that will likely end up shifting. We were expecting to see about 600,000 acres shift out of North Dakota and Minnesota out of spring wheat. We think those acres are likely to go into soybeans.
What's the best way for our viewers and listeners to get in touch with FBN and maybe get a chance to read through the planning report?
FBN.com. If you go there, if you don't already have an account, you can create one. It's free. There's a ton of information that we push out. I think this is one of the most exciting reports that we push out every year. But it's part of the homepage when you log in. It's part of what we consider FBN community. There's a community post. You can go right there, download the report.
Cody, thanks so much for the time here today. Always appreciate it, and have a great weekend, and we'll speak again soon.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you to Cody Bills of Farmers Business Network for joining today's show. That brings us to the end of Weekend Ag Matters. You can find this episode and all of our past episodes of the show on our website at iowaagnet.com. Just click on the podcast tab. For Russ Parker, Dustin Hoffmann, and Riley Smith, I'm Mark Magnuson. You've been listening to Weekend Ag Matters on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network.